Hi, welcome back to Listen If You're Lonely. I hope you're doing well. If you're new here or you've forgotten, my name's Helen, and this is a show I started back in 2021 and am now trying very hard to do a better job of 3.5 years later. It's really nice to be back. First, I apologize for the audio quality. It was not great in the last episode, and it still isn't on this one. I'm actually sitting in my car right now because it's the only quiet space I have access to. So it's going to take a while for me to figure out the best space to record this in and the best mic to do it on. And I'm also a grad student working part-time, so any fancy recording equipment or soundproofing are just a nice dream for now. Moving on. This is week 2 of reaching out into the dark, and I'm still really nervous about being found, I guess. Or finding something. I don't know why I find it so embarrassing to be starting out. Like I have to justify my presence on the internet with numbers or something. You know, every time I want to post on Instagram or whatever, I can't help but feel like people are going to laugh at me. Like, who are you to be posting these pictures of yourself you asked your friend to take? You've 100 followers. Like, I need a lot of followers in order to prove that I'm cool and worthy of doing cool stuff, or just posting a picture of me that I kind of like. I think it's rooted in this deep-seated belief I have that everyone is cooler than me and looks down on me, but that's a story for another day. And I mean, the truth is, everyone starts somewhere. Hopefully, someday we'll be looking back on these episodes and laughing about how amateur they are. And I just have to remember my professor's advice. Do what you can when you can. This is what I can do right now, and whether one person listens to this or 100, it's still worth putting my all into it, right? Oh, and here's a little update on my anti-hibernation goals. First, they were that every week from now until at least the beginning of summer, I'm going to try to schedule one activity where I'm moving and another activity with a friend. And every month, I'm going to try to do at least one thing that can help me meet more people. I figured out January's. A local brewery is hosting an event for Swifties. And I figured it'll be a lot of other women around my age, and we have at least one thing in common. So I'm pretty excited. As for the other two, this past week I went on a walk with someone, even though it's really cold. And I invited a friend I haven't seen in a while to go to a cat cafe with me. So I'd say it's going pretty well. And if you made any New Year's resolutions, I'd love to hear about them and how they're going in the comments under this episode. So today's topic is twofold: staying and going. Maybe some of you listening have moved at some point in your life, or even recently. Maybe some of you have called the same place home your entire life. For the first 18 years of my life, I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood in a house that was plenty big enough for my family. I knew the way to school, the park, the grocery store, the train station, the mall, basically everywhere, like the back of my hand. I could do these routes in my sleep. I could do them blind. But I had hardly any friends in high school, and I was always bored. I wanted or needed a change of pace when I graduated. And for years, I had found solace in movies and YouTube videos, and on Friday nights when I had no one to talk to, at least I could listen to other people talking. Anything to fill the silence, right? So I fell in love with the film industry, and I really, really wanted to work for BuzzFeed for some reason. Please don't judge me. This was about 2016, so they were actually kind of popular back then. Anyways, I thought that if I wanted a career in film, I needed to move to California. Logically, right? So I ended up touring USC, UCLA, UCSB, UCSD, UC Irvine. I think that's all. Maybe more? Basically, we saw a lot of California schools. And I did fall in love with a couple of them, especially USC. Not that I had a chance of getting in, or even affording it, if I did. But I was 17, and I didn't really care. I wanted an escape, and this was it. And I did apply to USC, and I think UCSD. And when decision letters started coming in, I first got into UIC, there in Illinois, and then Eastern Michigan, and the University of Minnesota. That's it. No California schools. I was devastated, but to be honest, I didn't have a good application, and I didn't really have a chance of getting in. I didn't participate in anything in high school, and my personal statement was about how my first summer job showed me how to come out of my shell, because I thought it'd be too cliche to talk about the loss of my mom in my essay. Using your dead parent for pity points with college admission teams was so last season, in my mind. Looking back, that was such a stupid mentality. That experience changed the very fabric of my being and taught me a lot about resiliency and the power of having a community around you to care for you and lift you up. And I wish I wrote about that instead of a summer job at a fancy grocery store. I mean, have you guys seen that girl who got into Harvard with her essay about hating the letter S? That's the story I should have told. But I didn't. And so I had 3 schools to choose from: UIC, Eastern Michigan, and Minnesota. One really close, one really far, and one even further. And I picked Minnesota. UIC wasn't the right fit, and I had never even seen EMU. Minnesota, when I toured it, had been fine. I had heard that it was cold up there, but I toured it in the summer when it was blazing hot, and my dad and I had a really good time walking around campus and taking the light rail into downtown Minneapolis. Honestly, it was a pretty easy choice. I still wanted to get away, and Minnesota was 360 miles away, and you had to cross 2 state lines to get there. Seemed far enough. And then sometime in senior year, I started to realize what I would lose when I left. Around that time, I had begun to get close to my aunt, my mom's older sister, and how could I leave her when I had finally had someone who actually wanted to spend time with me? And then there's the matter of my little sister, who I'd be leaving behind. And those familiar routes, and that comforting familiarity. Because familiarity had been a burden to me for years, when it felt like monotony. But suddenly I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a kind of peace, and I didn't know how to walk away from that. So I cried a lot, and I got angry a lot, and I searched tirelessly for some way out of it. But my dad was pretty firm. I was going to college. Moving away was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Watching my dad and my sister leave my dorm room to go home while I had to stay behind, that's a new kind of heartbreak. And knowing that a brand new chapter of my life was starting did not hold a candle to the fact that a chapter of my life had officially closed, and I could never go back to it. See, I've always had issues with change. I never feel ready for something new. Have you ever heard that quote, "Everything I've ever let go of has claw marks on it"? That's me, to a T. I cling on to everything, good or bad, because I just crave consistency. Having your foundation shaken early does that to you, I think. But maybe I shouldn't blame all my quirks on losing my mom, so I don't know. Either way, I let go of home, but I left a lot of claw marks on it. And God, I do not think I spent a single second of my freshman year not wanting to go home. I called and texted my sister constantly, often just broke down crying alone in my dorm, wishing for things to be different, and I thought about going home constantly. In the margins of my notebooks, I would draw my house. And I actually kind of tricked my family into flying me home 2 weekends in a row my first semester. The first, my aunt paid for the flight, and the second, my dad did. And then I got the flu from being on 4 airplanes in the span of 2 weeks. So that's karma, I guess. When the pandemic hit, I was on spring break, visiting California with my dad. For some reason, I thought even more distance would make me feel better, and I had signed up for the National Student Exchange, where U.S. students get the study abroad experience without leaving the country. I was going to be spending a year at Cal State Northridge, which is, surprise, surprise, in LA, and I had just flown from Minneapolis to Chicago, and then from Chicago to LA to tour CSUN with my dad. Just before the return flight took off, I got an email that I would not be finishing the semester in person, and I actually had to find a way to pack up everything in my dorm and get it home in like 2 weeks, or they would remove it for me. And I had to go get my stuff ASAP, because it's not like I thought to bring home any of my notebooks or anything for spring break, which was supposed to be a week. So my sister, who had an extended spring break while her high school figured out what to do, hopped in the car with us, and the 3 of us repeated that long drive up north. This is going to sound crazy, but I felt like the pandemic was some sort of genie situation. I wanted to go home so badly, and my wish was granted. But at what cost, you know? And despite being so thankful to go home, I still cried as I peeled my glow-in-the-dark stars off the ceiling above my tiny, lofted twin XL bed. I should have been happy to go home, but I wasn't. I was untethered from the routine I had just started to build, away from the friends I had just made, and I couldn't stop sleeping like 10 or 12 hours every night. Later that summer, when I went back to the therapist I had in high school, I found out that there's a name for what happened. Depressive episode. I had 2 that year, one when I started college, and one when I went home. Kind of ironic that both things made me depressed, right? Looking back, the pandemic was obviously hard for many, many reasons, and it affected people in ways we'll probably never fully heal from, just grow around. But I'm grateful for the second chance I got to be home. I went on walks with my aunt and got to eat family dinners again and spent basically every waking moment hanging out with my sister. Fall of 2020, my campus reopened, but most classes remained online, and I just planned on staying home. My sister, on the other hand, started college all the way in Arizona. She became the daughter who left, and I was happy to be the daughter that stayed. I took pride in it, weirdly. Unfortunately, I still did not have any friends in Illinois, so all I did was watch Twitch streams and YouTube videos or hang out with my dad and my aunt. And then one night I was telling my dad about a 5-hour-long stream I sat through that day, and he said, I think you need to go back to campus. And I was like, why would I do that? I'm perfectly fine here. But he thought it might be good for me to talk to people my own age, and I wasn't too convinced, but we made a deal. He would pay for my housing for the semester, and I had to stick it out for a month. If I still hated it then, I could come back home. So I moved back to Minneapolis on September 19th of 2020. I bought a calendar as soon as I moved in, and I circled October 19th, exactly 1 month from that date, and then September 25th, I met my best friends, a couple people who happened to live in my corner of the dorm building. I have that date saved because the night I ran into them, all hanging out in a study lounge, I texted my sister that I saw a bunch of people who I wanted to befriend, and I did. I lied and said my roommate needed privacy to make a phone call, and could I please sit with them? Listener, my roommate was quietly doing homework at their desk. I just needed an in, and it worked, and we became friends, and I stayed. But I kept this complex as the daughter who stayed home, because I drove home every single month. My childhood bedroom still had so much stuff in it, you probably couldn't tell I'd even moved out. And in February of 2021, I went home for 2 whole weeks to house sit while my dad went on vacation with his girlfriend. I'd spend my days doing my schoolwork, and every night I'd go out at sunset and shovel the snow, which just kept falling. It was so peaceful, and genuinely I think I could have stayed in that house forever. I planned on moving home after I finished undergrad. I still had so many strings, so many connections and memories tying me to that home. And then, in the summer of 2022, just 4 months before I graduated college, my dad sold that house. This is still kind of an open wound because I loved that place. It was my last physical connection to my mom. It was my escape, my oasis in the desert. And since then, my dad moved into his girlfriend's much smaller place, and I haven't really had a home. So I've stayed in my college apartment in Minneapolis, which doesn't feel like home either. And I applied to grad school in Minneapolis, prolonging how long I would be formally tied to this place. But I kept my Illinois ID for years, because it had my old home address on it, and I could pretend that the place was still mine. But what claim did I have to that space anymore? I was in Minneapolis almost all the time, my sister was in Arizona, my dad was home alone. I know it was time to downsize. I realized that. As my friends graduated, though, that following spring, I became the one who stayed. Not in Illinois, in Minnesota. I had friends move to Michigan, Connecticut, Massachusetts, California. The 2 that didn't leave the state moved half an hour away and 2 hours away, respectively. I'm the one who stayed behind, in the college apartment, once again clinging to a past that everyone else had let go of. I've done a lot of work over the past 2 years to make this city actually feel like home. I still miss my home, badly and frequently, but I have tied as many threads to Minneapolis as I used to have to Chicago. I like my job a lot, And I have doctors here, and a hairstylist, and a tattoo artist, and an auto shop where the guys don't try to rip me off because I'm a woman. I've even become a regular at the movie theater. I've always wanted to be a regular somewhere. It's so cool. Recently, my sister moved home. She plans on staying for a few years to live in the city with her friends. And one night, when I was home for Christmas, I drove her and her friends to the bar. And as they chatted about which one was the best, I thought, she belongs here, more than she ever did in Arizona. And I remembered that over the summer, my cousin came up to visit, and I showed her around some of my favorite local spots. We were standing at a park, watching a band play, and she said, "This place is so you." And I think that's the same feeling as I had with my sister. Sometimes a person just fits into a place, like a puzzle piece. And I think I found my puzzle just by chance. I'm still struggling with being the daughter who left. Over Thanksgiving break, some family members asked me if I was going to move back after I finished grad school, and I told them I planned on staying for at least another year, and they seemed disappointed. It's really hard being away from my family. It's been really hard being away from my family. In the past few years, I've gotten closer to my cousins, but one by one, they've moved home. I have one cousin left out of the state. She lives in DC, but she and her husband are hopefully moving back pretty soon. And then it's just me. I'll be the long-distance daughter, if you've ever heard that phrase. I think it's from TikTok. And I've done a good job of not missing important events, but it's a lot to go back and forth so much. My car is wearing down, and so am I. When I start working full-time, coming home for a full week for Thanksgiving and Christmas probably just won't be feasible anymore. It's also difficult sometimes to be away from family just logistically. Recently, I had a procedure done where I needed a driver and someone to stay with me for at least 12 hours, and my dad had to fly from Chicago because I just didn't have anyone here to take care of me. And when I got my wisdom teeth out last summer, I had to drive back to Chicago for it for the same reason. I have friends here, friends who feel like family, but there's kind of a limit to how much we're capable of helping each other. Man, as I'm saying all this, it really sounds like I want to go home, right? But every time I think about leaving Minneapolis, I think about my favorite view of the skyline, and my favorite restaurants, and the familiar routines. The routines I could do in my sleep, the routines I could do blind. And it's hard when home is more than just one place. It's hard when home is people and the memories you have with them. There's another quote I love. You can easily return to the past, but no one is there anymore. And I kind of live in memories of my old home, especially. I map it out in my head all the time because I'm really desperate not to forget it. And I didn't take any photos before I left. I can't believe I didn't take any photos. Sometimes, I dream of buying it back someday. But what would I be buying? A house my family doesn't live in, shaped not by our hands, but by the hands of the people who live there now. The textured wallpaper I used to run my hands over was removed. The couch where I would watch movies with my sister was thrown out. The blue paint I picked out at 13 for my bedroom walls has been painted over. If I were to buy it in 20 years, when the new family maybe moves out, my dad would not be there in the basement watching TV. My sister would not be in the bedroom next to mine. So it's time to let go, isn't it? Because my hometown isn't mine anymore either. Every time I go back, things are different. The routines aren't so familiar anymore. I have to face the facts. I left, and it's okay. I've lost things because of that decision, but I've gained a whole lot too. Currently, my plan is to stay in Minneapolis for one more year. Then I'll be applying for another master's program, maybe an MFA or something that'll actually lead me to a career where I can make a livable salary. And I'm going to apply to schools up here and in Chicago and let fate decide where I go. Is that a cop-out? Probably, but it's kind of like what I did for undergrad, and it worked out well so far. I don't know. That plan will probably change. Maybe I'll actually find a job making decent money with a master's in early childhood education. Could happen, right? I don't know. What do you think? What's home for you? Well, I've been talking for a while, so I'm going to end it there. But you can follow me on Instagram at Listen If You're Lonely, no apostrophe, and let me know if there are any other social media accounts you think I should set up. You know, now that TikTok's back, maybe I'll start an account there. Anyways, this has been Listen If You're Lonely. Thanks for spending some time with me tonight. I hope that you feel a little less lonely now, wherever you are. See you next time.